And we're back. So tonight, we got a big fat question to kind of unpack here, and we're gonna try to not go super crazy because it's running a little late. I'm really starting to kind of feel it, and yeah, and I think it is helpful because we had sort of a bit of a precursor conversation about this, but just circling back around here, the sort of the inciting incident for tonight's episode really is this question that my buddy John McKelvey submitted in our Discord at one point in time, not too long ago. And again, I'm just going to reiterate the question, restate the question. But where in Scripture would you point to for the idea of entertainment? And he sort of says playing video games being the main one here in mind, but really any form of recreation or entertainment being okay for Christians. And just he said specifically thinking from the perspective of someone saying that we should be solely focused on worshiping the Lord, growing in Him, and sharing the gospel, so that our time should be better spent than using it for entertainment. And that's a big question, and there's a lot of things like to wrestle with there. And as a bit of a spoiler, uh, to be fair, I don't think there's an easy answer here. I think that this is the kind of question where, at the end of the day, um, you're going to have to wrestle with this, and you're going to have to find and see where you land, and you're going to have to submit yourself to Scripture and to wisdom and to the counsel of others that you trust. And some of that conversation I think actually happened in our Discord, and and John O, not John McKelvey, but another John actually responded and offered I think some really interesting insight here as well. But I'm going to offer up a little bit of a TLDR. Sort of like I had reached out to Jared again, my pastor and my friend, to have him on and sort of help. I wanted him to help us sort of wrestle with this a little bit. Um, but I think there's an interesting sort of anecdote that I'm going to just sort of say that has more or less, I would basically agree with this, is that essentially it's kind of one of these things where it's like, it depends. And I know that's not a super clean answer, um, for like, if somebody sort of like, let's just say like in this scenario, somebody comes up to you and says like, give me, a strong case for like justifying engaging with video games or just entertainment as a broad, or just even recreating in sort of like broad strokes. Okay. And I know I'm sort of like subbing some words in here, but I think in some ways, like entertainment and recreation, they're not completely identical, but they are similar. And so I think like in a lot of ways, we see some initiatives like, John Piper's "Don't Waste Your Life" is obviously like one of those things where that kind of addresses some of this. And we'll get there. We'll get there. But I'm circling back to what Jared said to me, is that, if someone made the argument for saying like, we shouldn't be wasting time with recreation, we shouldn't be wasting time with entertainment, these are kind of like, these are inconsequential sort of things, and we ought to be just spending time praying and studying the word and ministering to others, and we just need to pour ourselves out in all this. There's an element of truth to that. But I think like the other side of that is that to dismiss all recreation as just being useless or futile is a problem. Um, and that, there are some forms of recreation that are good, like, lifting weights. Lifting weights, if you do it with the right sort of perspective and the right mindset and the right sort of like heart conditions, can be beneficial, not just for you, not, but it's like if you were okay, so like that was something that I used to do a lot of, and I haven't in the last couple of years, mostly because my hands are just garbage and they hate me. Um, and it makes it really hard to like if like yeah. Anyways, but if you look at lifting weights, okay, as a form of entertainment or recreation. And that's what it is for a lot of people. A lot of people just enjoy that activity. They enjoy. But if you go to the gym every day and you really love gym culture and all that, but the goal is just to like look good, to get bigger for the sake of getting bigger and not really, you know, but if it's just an exercise in vanity and self glorification, then it absolutely is a waste of time. That absolutely that's wicked. But if you're going to the gym every day, if you're lifting weights every day, and you're saying like, you know what, I'm gonna go, um, so that like one, my body's a temple, and I want to be a good steward of it. I want to like take care of it. I want to, so it's like, you know, I'm just like overall, I'm going to sort of take care of the thing that I've been given from the Lord, which that's a good motive. But I also want to sort of like equip myself so that I can be a better servant and a better help to my friends and neighbors and the people around me, that I can better protect and provide for the people who I'm called to protect and provide for. And that's good. That's actually not a bad thing. And to tell somebody that that's a wicked thing or a waste of time, that's actually sinful. That's error. And so, in a way, video games can be beneficial if they serve the goal of, so, and this is the thing, as long, and just broader categories here at this point in time, recreation, as long as it is engaged properly and well, and it is not uh, pulling us away from our duties and our obligations to our friends and our families and our church and chiefly God, we're fine. It's like there's room for that. But when they are engaged poorly, which unfortunately I think is probably more often than not, they are. And so it's kind of one of those things where it's like yes and no. And now there's a lot more to sort of unpack there. Um, and basically, like the sort of the general principles that I sort of appeal to, scripturally speaking, um, and is that I think of, well, one, I think about the broader strokes of wisdom, like the ant in Proverbs, and I think about when it talks about like seasons for laughter, seasons for joy, seasons for, in Ecclesiastes, when it talks about the different types of seasons, that um, we will have. There are times to be busy, and there are times to basically. There are times when maybe work isn't as necessary, and at that point in time, like sort of, again, as long as you're not neglecting your duties and your obligations, it's kind of like it can be morally neutral. Um, but um, that's kind of, I guess, where like the jumping off point is, and again, there's a lot to sort of like unpack here and move along with, but Parker, all of that, like I've thrown a bunch of information out there. So now I need you to engage all of it and do it like just, but how, I mean, how would you respond to this question?
Um, I think a lot of it does come down to, you touched on it, like motives for people as to why they're doing what they're doing. I don't think there's really an easy or pat answer. It's tempting to try to say all of X activity or Y activity is bad, but a lot of it does come down to the motives of why you're doing it. Now, I would say like it's probably true to say that most of the time is your time better spent, serving the Lord in some way other than like playing video games. Like Probably, but maybe not necessarily all the time, because you do have to have time to rest and refresh and recharge, and maybe there's a Sabbath and there's an opportunity to rest and recharge that involves video games. But I think that that's like a slippery slope that we all have to sort of be disciplined in and mature in our understanding of, so that we, if we do find that one of the ways that we rest and that we recharge so that we can continue serving the Lord is through video games, that we just don't overdo it. And I think the tendency is really, with our own hearts being idol factories, to like overdo it and to put games or recreation or entertainment in a place it was never meant to occupy. So there's dangers on many different sides to the conversation that I think require a nuanced response that I can't just give you like a bumper sticker slogan to walk out of here with, but we can certainly dig into that and unpack that some more.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's the thing is that navigating this requires maturity. And it requires like frankly, it requires sort of wrestling with this to a certain extent, and maybe even sort of a little bit of wrestling with this with a little bit of fear and trembling, because I think there's some very serious stakes here too, and it's like based on our earlier conversation this afternoon, there's some pretty sobering things where it's like I my primary sort of angle at coming at this is like and as much respect as I have for a guy like John Piper, right? Part of my frustration is that, and it's like I think John Piper's intent in sort of authoring and in writing a book like Don't Waste Your Life is really good. And he's responding to a legitimate problem culturally, where it's just he sees a lot of people sort of just being frivolous, a lot of Christians sort of just, again, sort of being just wasting their time and their energy, and sort of just squandering on themselves and their comforts and their pleasures, and not sort of being a lot more kingdom oriented. And I think what sort of happens with that sometimes is that I think like it sort of almost encourages a mildly ascetic form of Christianity, where it's like we almost want to behave as though sort of like anything physical or in the world is bad. And it's like, and again, there are admonitions to not be worldly people, but I think that's it's not saying, and again, it's not you know be in the world and not of the world. And I think that like to me, it's like my response is like I think we just need to just and frankly, it's hard because we're in a culture where yes, the error is to just to indulge in excess. But it's like my response. I guess I look at this and and this is kind of like the part where we kind of like you and and again, it wasn't even really butting heads when we were talking about this earlier, but it was like it was definitely a friction point where I think like one of the things that the church can do is model a responsible sort of intake of these things, is to be like we can raise up mature believers who can play video games or who can sort of engage with entertainment well, and part of it will be a model for the world to see, like, because so much of the world is it's just consume. It's like binge this show on Netflix, watch 1,000 episodes of One Piece, in a sitting. It's just like, and again, it's like the consume. It's like play this game, play this game, play this game, buy this album. And so much of it is just like constantly that there's sort of this wash of media just kind of like rolling over us. And what I think like one a way that we can differentiate ourselves as within the church is to, especially looking at video games, is to like say like okay, like this can be part of a healthy and mature Christian's sort of like rhythms and routines. It's just when it does, like, the problem is like it's very easy, especially for this medium, to slip into something more. It is kind of like, because of all of the design hooks and the narrative hooks and everything else, like it is pretty easy for video games to basically become time wasters, versus just sort of like the bits of refreshment. Um, so yeah, there's kind of that, but again, it's a slippery slope, and I think like some of it is like, it's, I have to be honest, it's like what I'm talking about is difficult. I think it is the proper response to the world, where it's like we're just people like who can engage with these things. We're not mastered by them. We can enjoy them well, but frankly, like that requires a lot of discipline and a lot of maturity that, if I'm being honest, I think most, myself included at times, most of us can't always execute well, um, or even consistently. So, um, yeah. So Parker, you know,
Yeah, let me. Maybe it would be helpful to just back up a little bit and go through a couple of things. I have some thoughts here, and some of this, quite frankly, is not my own thoughts. It's stuff that I've borrowed from things that my pastor has written or
hmm
preached on. So I won't claim that I'm the sole originator of some of these ideas. But one, I guess there's this question of like, does God even, does all he want from us is like just hardcore service? Or is there a part of God that, appreciates art and beauty and music and pleasure in essence? And so maybe part of the answer sort of goes there first. And so I do think that God is in fact a God of pleasure, the God we worship. He's not just looking solely for service and obedience at every moment. He has created good things in this world for us to enjoy and to take delight in. And part of that enjoyment and delight, though, is not to just revel in the thing, but is to be pointed back to the good Father and Creator who gave it to us. And so I can think of a couple of verses, because I think part of the question was rooted in like, well, what verses would you go to or stuff like that. So we can start talking some actual scripture
hmm
in some of this. But Luke 12:32 says, "Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." So there's one example of the scriptures talking about God having good pleasure in giving us things. um, Psalm 16 verse 11 says, "You have made known to me the path of life. You will fill me with joy in your presence, eternal pleasures at the right hand of God." So we know God himself is the ultimate pleasure, but Psalm 16, verse 11 is talking about he'll fill me with joy in his presence, and there will be eternal pleasures at his right hand. So it goes to show that God's like, there's an element of pleasure, an element of joy, an element of goodness and sweetness there that maybe gets lost in some of the conversation about do this, don't do that type
yeah.
of a mentality. I think the one other verse I would think of is Psalm 115. Maybe I have it wrong here. The verse says, "Our God is in heaven. He does whatever pleases him." So God does things of his own will in his own providence, and he does them because they are pleasing to him.
Yeah.
So there's this idea that the very motives of God please him, and he's obviously not accountable to anyone else. He just does whatever he wants to do. And the reason why he does it is because it's pleasing to him. So the idea that God is a God of pleasure, I think, has some sort of scriptural background and precedent. So I guess we can sort of eliminate that as a straw man argument that he's not by pointing to
I
verses like
think
that.
even sort of like, and this sort of ties into some of the things that, Jono submitted, but that, um, God instituted a lot of feasts and festivals in the Old Testament. Like, he wanted his people to have seasons of just enjoying the things, the work of their hands. Um, and part of those festivals and that feasting was it was to reflect on his generosity and his kindness.
Hmm.
But like
Hmm.
he was giving those times of rest, those times of restoration to people to enjoy the things, you know, around them, to enjoy the food that they had worked for, to enjoy friends and company and, maybe even their homes, you know. And so it's like, this is not a concept, like you're going to find very little, I think, scripturally that explicitly commands these things. But I think when you look at the character of God, yeah, he is an artist, and I think there's a way in which you can look at video games, and you can sort of see all, like, I'm playing Elden Ring, and there's like all sorts of intricacy and sort of wild stuff going on there. And what I can do in a way is at times I can delight in my father for making a mind that clever, and sort of like it's like, and then it can kind of pull me outside and say like, okay, and so there's this really kind of like fascinating little simulation that somebody's built, Lord, and you gave that person that creativity and you gave them that ability. But then what's really kind of funny is that in some ways this is just a cheap knockoff of the thing that you've already like built, and like the wonders and the mysteries of all of the things that you've done in reality. And there's a way, like there's a through line there for me to worship. You know what I'm saying? Where it's like I can look and say like, Lord, this is really cool, and thank you, and kind of like move on. Um,
Hmm.
you know, and so I do think like I think the other thing is like, when we talk about Paul, or we haven't brought up Paul yet, but Paul writes a lot of stuff in the New Testament. But there's a passage that I think a lot of times there's always the appeals to Christian liberty. And there's a couple of things there. One of the caveats that I would throw out is like when the Apostle Paul is writing about Christian liberty, like he also caveats that like that our liberty is not there, like that we have been set free not for our own desires, but to do the work of the Lord. But you
Hmm.
have been set free, and that's not sort of a counterfeit freedom. It's like you have literally been set free, and there is an amount of liberty and discernment and discretion. Now, like obviously, you want these things to be, you want to be informed and shaped by wisdom and discernment, right? But like that, we are free, and you are free to make decisions, and you are in to a certain extent, as long as it does not lead you into, you are free to pursue many things. And so we have to like, we can't just sort of say like, and in some ways I think like the attempt to say like, well, recreation, entertainment, video games, television, sports, whatever, it's all a waste of time. And again, there's a way in a sense, in a very real sense, that's kind of a true statement. But it also, I think, it disregards the finitude of humanity. The fact is like, we need sleep. That like God has like, in his graciousness, he's like, we know that like we have limits. And every day you hit a very hard physical limit where it's like all of a sudden it's like your body's like, nope, it's time. And caffeine does a heck of a job staving that off, and it blocks the neuroreceptors and all this other stuff. It's a fascinating little sort of um, chemical compound. I was going to call it a drug, and it is, but yeah. Anyways, but it's like I think even some of one of the things that video games and just in general sort of embracing healthier rest and recreation cycles and patterns, and even like the thoughts sort of going into it, is just understanding that like it's okay to step away from things and like take a breather. And video games can be a part of that. Entertainment can be a part of that. Like sometimes we need our brains to just like not be working or gnawing on a particular issue. Sometimes we need something, and video games can be that something where we sort of like not even turn our brain off, but we just sort of shift gears, and we focus in on something else, and that gives the rest of our cognitive capacity time to like cycle things in the background. So there some of it is that. It's like I'm throwing a lot out there, and this is, but how would you respond to, I mean, what do you think about what I've sort of thrown out there so far here, Parker?
Yeah, I think I agree with most of it. I think something that I want to get to, there's a couple things I want to get to first, but I do want to circle back to this idea of video games. And I think we're treating them as this sort of like morally neutral object when
Mm.
in reality they're very not. They're not amoral, and many times actually video games do wander into the realm of being immoral. So I think at some point in this conversation we do need to address the elephant in the room of like, when is it sinful to sort of like delve into video games? Because I think there's large portions of the video game industry and the entertainment industry that Christians probably just have no business partaking
Hmm.
in or being a part in. And I think that, we don't have those conversations much in church, or if we do, it's just a blanket statement and there's not really any maturity or discernment behind those conversations. So having more sort of nuanced conversations where we understand those things and engage with them a little better, I think would be helpful, especially for kids who don't really have the sort of abstract thought capacity to understand this stuff. And they want to just sort of either wallow in it or be rebellious or whatever. But so there's some stuff to unpack there. But I did want to share some thoughts before we get into that. And it's actually on verses about honey in Proverbs of all things. And this is going to sound weird, but just stick with me here
Hmm.
for the quick journey I'll take you on here. But so Proverbs 24:13 says, "Eat honey, my son, for it is good. Honey from the comb is sweet to the taste." And then if you look at the scriptures, the next verse after that, it goes on to something else. So that's kind of like all he wants to say at the moment is just eat honey. And the idea is that like honey is kind of a metaphor. It's just talking about something that's good. It's like eat it because it tastes good. It's not necessarily that it's going to like provide these wild nutritional benefits and there's some pragmatic reason. He's just saying eat it. It's good. It's sweet to the taste. Like enjoy it. It's a good thing in life that God has blessed us with. So like, partake of that. But there's also like other proverbs as well. And Proverbs 25:16 says, if you eat honey, eat just enough. Too much of it and you'll vomit. So it's kind of a weird thing. So on one hand, there's a proverb that's commanding us to eat honey because it's good. Then on another hand, you've got another proverb that comes along and says, but only eat a little bit of it. And if you eat too much of it, it's actually bad for you. And I think that we'll get to a third verse where I think it's very clear that it's not really talking about honey. Honey is actually a metaphor for other things, but that's kind of where I'm headed with this. And so if you go to Proverbs 25:27, it says, it is not good to eat too much honey, nor is it honorable to seek one's own honor. And so he's talking about honey, and then all of a sudden he's talking about seeking your own honor. And it's like, what's the connection? It's like, well, honey is just a metaphor that he's using, and it symbolizes like the good things in life that God has given us. And he says, enjoy those things, but understand that it's going to be very easy to overdo it and it's going to make you sick. And so you only need a little bit of it to satisfy you. Like I've made you so that you eat a little bit of honey and that should be good and that should satisfy you. And if you overdo it with the honey, it's going to be detrimental to you. So have discernment and have wisdom about how much honey you partake of. And I think that that's because he's using it as a metaphor and he just goes on to talking about honor and seeking honor. Like we can feel free to sort of use honey as a metaphor for like the good things in life. And so there are good things in life that we can enjoy, but we've got to be careful with them. And it's going to
Yeah.
be very easy to overdo those things, to overindulge in those things. And that's really kind of a bad, almost a satanic way to live. It's like you're empty, you're restless, you're wandering around, you're looking for that next little bit of honey that tastes just a little different to sort of keep you going, and it becomes idolatrous. And your relationship with that good thing can become very idolatrous very quickly. And so I think
Yeah.
that's why it's saying that. And there's another verse about honey in Proverbs. It's just full of verses about honey for whatever reason. It says Proverbs 27:7, he who is full loathes honey, but to the hungry, even what is bitter tastes sweet. So, in a lot of ways, we've got a lot of people in America who just are completely overindulged. Like God has blessed us, and it's good that He's blessed
Yeah.
us, but we've just way, way overdone it on all of the good things in life. And that could be food, or it could be entertainment or recreation or whatever it is. And I think what the scriptures are saying when it's talking about all these verses about honey, it's like just a little bit is good. That's what you need. It's just a little bit. And to overdo it, you'll overdo it very quickly and you'll make yourself sick. So don't do that.
Yeah, I mean, and that's sort of been the thing is like even when you look at sort of like just how the Sabbath principle sort of plays out, is that one day in seven is to be set apart for rest, um, and that's in there. It's sort of implied that the bulk of our time and our energy is meant to be oriented towards work and towards labor, and the bulk of our day, and that and that there is a time to sort of put that down. There's a time to sort of like step away from that. Um, but yeah, but yeah, I think too there is wisdom though, and just sort of like I think that, and that's the thing is like when it talks about like if you eat too much honey, it's going to make you sick. Is that frankly like we live in sort of a culture that has gorged itself on the sweetness, the candy of just modern media. And yeah, that's part of the reason that we're as sort of like detached and just unhinged, you know, here in
It's
the
bad for
West.
us.
Yeah,
It's not good for us to, if we love the things of this world and we're too attached to them and we love pleasure, you know, it's very much to our detriment. Like Proverbs 21:17 says, he who loves pleasure will become poor. Whoever loves wine and oil will never be rich.
well, and I think even I want to say it's in James, but I know it's I don't. I'm not sure it is, but I know that somewhere in the epistles, Paul might it might be one of the Pauline epistles, but just warns against like the basically gluttony, like the people who sort of follow their appetites, and
I've got James 5 here, which says, come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you. You have lived on earth in luxury and in pleasure. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter.
yeah,
So to
and
live your life in pursuit of that pleasure, to make that your sole purpose and aim, to pursue video games or entertainment or all those things,
or just
Scripture says you're
pleasure as
just
a general rule.
hedonism, any of its
Yeah,
forms or
yeah,
methods, like is really we're just setting ourselves up for later judgment.
yeah. Um, so there is that, and it's like we need. I think you need these boundaries, you need these caveats, you need these warnings, because it's like the fact is like the medium just does lend itself to abuse. I think
Mm-hmm.
maybe in some ways even than more passive things like watching TV or listening to music or a podcast or even reading a book, because I think like the way like that again, that dopamine trigger, it's like when you're doing things in the game you get that dopamine hit, and it's like that's the accomplishment hormone. I mean, it's like I did something, and so it just kind of like, yeah, there is a unique and particular danger there that we have to sort of acknowledge. I think though too is like one of the other things is that, sort of circling back to what you said about that there are hard lines that we need to draw with entertainment and video games in particular, and just say like, no, we don't engage with like X, Y, and Z content. And I mean, like, there's some like pretty low hanging fruit, easy ones. Like, I think about nudity in video games, nudity, and like it's kind of one thing where nudity in television, it's frankly, I think like the argument to dismiss, like to just be like, no, we should have nothing to do with that, is frankly like that's not your husband, that's not your wife, that that's not for you. Like those bodies aren't for you to ogle. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think it gets a little more like, and only because it's not like a lot of times it's not like real. Like if there's nudity in video games, it's not really it it's based it's like one of those things where it's like that's not a real boob. That's not a real whatever. And so there's kind of like it might feel like there's a bit of gray area, but like at the same time, it's like it's about what's that doing to your heart? What is that doing to your mind? What is that training you? And I think that's part of the thing is that when I come back to this, is like all of these things are working on us. They are training us. They are teaching us how to engage. They are teaching us about just life. They like whether or not like those are good lessons or bad lessons or whatever. It's like and I don't want to reduce it down to just like data in, data out, right? But like that when we are taking these things in, they do work on us. And so we need to be careful there. I mean, but
Yeah,
you
there's
know
a
what?
desensitization process that happens, and it's different than a movie because in a movie there might be some kind of inappropriate content or a sex scene or something, but that's maybe that's I don't know 2 minutes out of the movie. But in a video game, you're in that world and you're immersed in this stuff for 60, 70, 80, 100 hours
Yeah,
plus. And so the level of exposure and the level of desensitization that can work on your heart, I think, is just exponentially greater. And you add in the idea that there's actually sort of moral agency in the actions you're doing. Like sometimes you actually have a choice of whether to engage with some of these things or to pass by them. And so it actually sort of pulls you into a complicity in a way that, watching a movie and just being a passive observer doesn't quite do. And so there's something unique about video games and the agency that it provides that I think is worth kind of thinking through. So I do agree with you, Nate. I would add maybe a couple other things. I think like just bringing it back to recreation though, like when could it be sinful to recreate? Like I think if you haven't taken care of your household, like if you haven't provided physically, emotionally, spiritually for your family and for those in your household, and you're instead recreating or doing, playing video games, like yeah, I think we should be fair to be able to say like that's an instance where otherwise maybe it's okay to dip into some video game, but if you've got unfinished business in your home, like you know we've got to draw we've got to draw a line there. um,
yeah, yeah.
so there's going to be areas like that where we just have to say that this stuff is not good under any circumstances when you put these sort of parameters around it.
Yeah, I think too, something that is, you know, you need to have sort of like, yeah, again, utilizing these things, leveraging these things at the right time. It's fine, but it's like, and frankly, I think sort of even coming back to it's like how would you sort of engage with or interact with so like let's I guess sort of going back to that root question, that inciting question, is like if someone said like you should be oriented focused on just like learning, memorizing chunks of scripture or whatever. um I think that there are passages where that Paul specifically kind of maybe pushes against just the almost sort of again that sort of like that almost like that Christian asceticism, or that like that asceticism, the ascetic tinged Christianity. Um, One of the passages that John sort of mentioned here, which I thought was good, and I know this is a little bit of a sidestep or a shift, but it's like is that 1 Timothy 4, verses 7 and 8. Have nothing to do with irreverent, silly myths. Rather, train yourself for godliness. For while bodily training is of some value, godliness is of value in every way, as it holds promise for the present life and also for the life to come. So, one of the things that John sort of points out is that Paul uses the example of athletics positively and commends that physical training has some value. It says bodily training, for while bodily training is of some value, that it's a good thing to train your body, is a good thing to sort of like step into this. Ultimately, like, we need to be pursuing godliness, and that's like that needs to be at the core and the root of everything. And so, like, I'm coming back to that question, is like, how, given sort of everything that we've talked about, and again, I do think, like, I'm concerned about, like, the strands of, again, that asceticism tinged Christianity, where it's like almost like, and again, this is a bit of a straw man, and I recognize that, but, like, I think, like, the other thing is that we have a lot of people. It's we need to, it needs to be a balanced sort of take. Anyways, I'm coming back to this, where Um, it's not that the physical things, it's not that physical training, it's not that physicality has no value, but that it is surpassed by the value of godliness. And that I think, like, what we know about neuroscience and how brains work and everything is that, like, people who work out, who exercise, they have better cognitive brain function. Like, I'm probably working at a disadvantage now because I'm fat. It's like I'm eating too many slices of pizza, too many Oreos, too many whatevers. Um, but it's like we are a holistic creature, and, like, it's not that the body and the spirit sort of, they're intermingled. And so I think, a lot of it just comes back to, like, it's sort of tied up with this finitude thing. And again, if somebody said, well, you would just be better off sort of doing all these other things, my response, again, to that particular question, like, shouldn't we be doing all these other things? It's like, well, one, no one does that perfectly consistently, period. Everybody's sort of got their pet hobby horse that, like, it's okay. And I think we have plenty of fairly recent examples, like a hero of mine, R.C. Sproul, good old Western Pennsylvania boy from Pittsburgh, PA, loved the Pittsburgh Steelers, loved Steelers football. He loved playing golf, you know, and he did those things, but he was also a mighty orator on, for the sake of the Lord. And I think that it is, simply put, it's one of those things, and not to just sort of say, like, it is not to just be like, oh, just live the good life, but it's like, it is about putting these things in their proper place. And so, for the person who would make the argument that entertainment is just a waste of time, there are two things I would say to them. How again, I say, like, maybe for that person it is a waste of time, but two, I think there's a bunch of, like, sort of like social aspects where it's like these things can actually help us to. I mean, I think about our friendship, right? It's like we initially bonded over video, like a shared love of video games. It's one of the things we bonded over. And it's like, I don't know. Well, frankly, I've got to be honest. I'm kind of struggling because I'm a little tired at this point in time, and my sinus pressure is really kind of making it hard to, like, to roll here. Um, but I think you kind of get what I'm getting at, right? Where it's like, I guess, sort of with everything that we've talked about here, like, if you met a person who said, like, video games are a waste of time, watching TV, it's a waste of time, how would you respond to that person in this instant? Like, because, and again, there's a part where it's like, I think we have to just be honest and say they can be, yes, like anything can be, but but that doesn't just, it's the blanket statement, I think, is actually, like, part of my problem is that it's making a broad assumption that is just, I think, it's incorrect. It's not true. And we need to be people who love truth. And so we need to say there are a lot of good things that can come out of this. and maybe we don't always necessarily have. I think there are some scriptural, like there's scriptures that help us reinforce, like can mount a bit of a defense for this. But all that being said, like if I came up to you and said, Parker, video games are a waste of time, how would you respond to that? Like, and you would be better off doing all these other things. What would your response sort of? What would your response be there?
Well, I think as I get older and time is sort of more precious, and and I just kind of have become more mature, I would say probably in a lot of situations and scenarios that is true. And if you're talking to somebody who let's say you're saying that as a parent because you've got a kid who is spending 15 hours a day playing World of Warcraft. I would say, like, yeah, I think I'm with
I
you
mean,
on
the kid's
that.
probably playing Fortnite at this point in time. Let's be honest.
They're playing 15 hours of Fortnite. Like, I'm not going to defend that in any way,
Yeah,
shape, or form. Like, and we shouldn't defend that. If people are doing these things because they'd rather do this than sort of live their real lives, like, yeah, I think we need to call that for what it is. Like Proverbs 28:19 says, he who works his land will have abundant food, but the one who chases fantasies will have his fill of poverty. So if your life is built around entertainment, if your life is built around chasing fantasy, like, are you better off serving the kingdom and storing up reward in heaven? Like, 100%. Absolutely. But if you're saying, is there no, if what you mean by that question is there's no space to enjoy anything good in life and it's just all about service to the Lord and service is what matters, then I would say, well, you better make sure you're not being hypocritical with that, because you
yeah,
probably have some sort of form of leisure or entertainment that you enjoy and it's just sort of off limits for other people. So I would check that, but I would also say, like, and we talked about this before, the motives matter. So even if we're talking about doing these things to the Lord, the heart in which you serve the Lord matters, because scripture says there's going to be many people who come to him on the day of judgment and say, Lord, Lord, I did all these things for you. I cast
hmm
out demons. I did all this stuff. And what's his response going to be? It's going to be, yeah, you did this stuff, but I don't even know you. So depart from me. And so
yeah,
there's this idea that, like, the motives and the heart and the person behind the actions is just as important, if not more important, than what those actions are. So I think
yeah,
there's like a motive even in asking that question, where somebody's sort of
yes,
thinking, I'm going to elevate myself as being better than somebody because I'm going to. I look at them and I saw them enjoying that thing, and I don't enjoy that thing, and I'm a holier person, and so I'm going to ask this question to sort of like be dismissive or condescending to this brother or sister because of what I see in them, and I would say that's dangerous ground to be on as well.
yeah, yeah. And what I would say, I think, is that, and again, I think we need to just sort of like be upfront in the conversation. Say like, can video games be a waste of time? Absolutely. And frankly, I think for the vast majority of people who are consuming them, they are wasting time. Um, but I think I think over, and maybe it's just like I'm trying to justify the fact that like I've been co-hosting a podcast for years now that sort of that mounts a bit of a defense there. But I think like just overall, like for the person who said you would be better off served, yeah, sort of, studying the word, ministering to people. It's like, well, duh. Yeah. Like it's kind of like, yeah, that's like an easy, like, sure. But, sh- and again, my thing is like, show me the person who does that perfectly consistently. And I think there is this sort of tension that we live in, right? Where we live in this reality of the simul justus et peccator. We are just and sinners. Like we are condemned, like our sin condemns us, but we are justified and set free by the grace of God. Um, and I think about just the nature of God, that He is a God of pleasure, that he is a generous father. And do we need to be careful? Absolutely. But you need to be careful with any good thing, because I think that the what it boils down to is that there are lots of good things in this world. Like creation didn't stop being good after the fall. It just it now it suffers under the effects of the fall. But creation is still good. Stuff is still good. It's just that we're not to be married to stuff the same way that the world is. Like we are to avoid worldliness, and that we're not sort of bound up in it. And I think frankly that worldliness includes like worldly ideologies, where there is sort of like there's a sort of the work hard play hard thing, where it's this workaholism so that we can be playaholics. You coined that term earlier this afternoon, and
I
it's like
didn't coin it, but yeah, I mentioned
well,
it.
you unloaded it on me. I don't know if I've ever heard playaholic before, um, but it's we're swimming in this water, and I just kind of come back and I'm like, I'm not sure that the proper like that the only response the church ought to have. Okay, and what I will do is I will amend my statement. Um, but I don't think that the only response the church ought to have for sort of like confronting the American Western worldliness, and sort of just again this consume, play this game, watch this movie, listen to this album, watch this show, whatever, like just that, and that constant sort of like be entertained cycle, is that we cultivate an open-handed approach to all these things, and we teach our children and we teach ourselves to sort of just like hold these things with a very loose hand, and just be able to like talk about them well. um because I think part of it is this, like I'm struggling a little bit to is that ultimately what wins people is the word, the word proclaimed. Like the word does not return void. Okay. And it either softens the heart or it hardens the heart. It softens the heart towards repentance, or it hardens the heart towards, judgment, towards condemnation. But I think the fact of the matter is that we're still people, and so we need to sort of in some ways embrace our humanity, um, in a way that does not embrace worldliness or the fallen nature of humanity. Like we need to, like, part of the call is to live towards the kingdom, and I think even part of a lot of the imagery of the kingdom is that someday, it's like when you're talking about like Psalm, like a lot of that is like talking about the fulfillment of like us being in paradise, where like we will enjoy Christ face to face, where work, like there will be some sort of labor or whatever, but it will not be the toil that we have. Like there is a trajectory, and like we can get snatches of that, tastes of that on this side. And I think that the problem is like we just need to be careful. And it's just I'm wrestling with this. Like so, and I'm verbal processing, and I'm tired at this point in time. So it's like it's the struggle is real. But if someone came up to me and said, Nate, video games are a waste of time, yeah, there I'd want a lot of clarifying questions, and I'd want to like sort of like poke at motives and say like, why are you saying this? Like and I'd want to sort of maybe, and hopefully not unkindly, but maybe expose any hypocrisy and say like, okay, like no, it's like these things can be, they can be a waste of time, but like ultimately it just boils down to like entertainment. The short version of the question, and it goes back to what that sort of that answer that I I I quoted from Jared, where it's like, can video games be a waste of time? Can entertainment, broad brushing it, saying can entertainment be a waste of time? Absolutely. It can also be part of a mature Christian's sort of like rest restoration, and recreative cycles or rhythms or patterns. And it can help them to do their job better. Like it might just provide enough of a bit of breathing room where they just need to like step away and sort of like turn off their brains, because sometimes we need that. Like, and I'm not sort of advocating for that. I think the problem is we turn off our brains entirely too much anymore. Um, but I think sometimes we need that breathing room, that space to sort of step away from a scenario and sort of like and maybe inhabit a slightly different mental space for a little bit so that we can get our bearings. And sometimes a little bit of escapism is good for that. And I don't think and frankly, I think about some of the narrative chops that a lot of these games have, and some of the things that they're saying, and the messages that we can wrestle with and struggle with. And this is media that the world is taking in around us. And I don't think, and again, it's not one of those things where I think we have to be like media savvy. I don't think we need to be totally with culture in lockstep and sort of just understanding all the different like cultural phenomena. But I think like it's part of being in the world and not of the world is that we just we know these things and we can speak into them well. And I think in some ways that means being active participants who don't abuse it, and model what what. And again, it's sort of like like the question turns into something else for me, because it's like there's questions underneath that I think really ask. And so like part of it is like, one, if someone came in and said, video games are a waste of time, I would think about that. I think there's a critique in there that am I wasting my time with this? Am I making this an idol in my heart? Like I think that's part of it. I would want that to be part of my response. I think the other part of that would be like hopefully to have a conversation and to really wrestle with that in sort of in a spirit of fear and trembling. Where it's like okay, like why do you think this? And yeah, it's just like it's a tough and it's a big question. And John offered a lot. Jono offered a lot of sort of like insight and in the Discord. And so for anybody listening to this, if you want to check that out, I think it's in the "What is your question?" Um, or which section did I put that in or pull that from? No, this is the best radio. Um, okay. Um, Man, this is awesome. Josh, when you eventually get around to this, you're going to have to edit this out and post. Um, it was in the, yes, it was in the "What is your question?" Video game category. And it's pretty substantial. Um, but this is, I'm sort of like kind of winding down and trying to wrap this up. But, Parker, do you have any sort of like insights or closing thoughts that you really want to kind of get out?
Well, a couple things, I guess. One of them is like I don't think video games are by any stretch of the imagination a necessity for anybody's life.
No, 100% not.
It's strictly a luxury. So for anybody to
Yes.
say I need video games, I think is an untrue statement, just
Yes.
flat out.
100%.
But I just think like again, as I get older, as I mature in the word, as I become more aware of my own sort of sinful proclivities and my own tendency toward idols, I think probably most of the time, if you can delight and refresh yourself in the Lord as opposed to entertainment and other things, I think, like you said it before, that's a duh. Yeah, of course. Like you probably should be doing that. I wouldn't say it any other way, and I wouldn't want to be quoted as saying it any other way. And I would think about things like the account of the virtuous woman. Like in Proverbs 31:27, it says, she watches over the affairs of her household and she does not eat the bread of idleness. So
Mm.
there's a sense that like diligence is praiseworthy. And so if video games for you are an excuse to be anything other than diligent, I think that's problematic.
Yeah.
And so there are just a lot of ways in which your hobbies in general, not just video games, can be problematic, but video games specifically can be problematic because again, it's not a morally neutral entertainment. It's not like a sport in the sense that you can just watch the sport and there's nothing going on. Video games, I think, are different in that they're laden with scantily clad women. They're filled increasingly with just cursing and bitterness. Like I was playing Bioshock Infinite the other day, and we were talking about the sort of satanic undertones of the game and how the ultimate morally praiseworthy sort of moment in that game is a man rejecting the gospel and the Christian message in a scene where he's being asked to be baptized as a believer, and he's his virtue is being unrepentant and turning to live his life away from religion and away from
Yeah.
gospel. And so I think there's a lot of areas in which video games are not as innocent as we portray them to be. They are filled with worldliness, worldly philosophies, and content that needs to be seriously scrutinized before we engage with them and thoughtfully engaged with. And this is an ongoing thing that you've seen some of the stuff I've been
Yeah.
writing up, and I haven't touched some of that in a little while, but I've been thinking about that for a while. But I would just maybe end on a quote from A.W. Tozer. I don't know what your thoughts are on Tozer, but I have a very thought provoking quote from him that
Well,
sort of
he's
aligns with.
overall pretty solid.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I've got a quote from him that is maybe something worth thinking about. So he says, he calls this the abuse of harmless things. The abuse of harmless things, by that he means the lawful things that you're not allowed to do. It's a Romans 14 issue, but he says the abuse of harmless things is the essence of sin. The growth of the amusement phase of human life to such fantastic proportions is a portent, a threat to the souls of modern men. It has been built into a multi-million-dollar racket with greater power over human minds and human character than any other educational influence on earth. For centuries, the church stood solidly against every form of worldly entertainment, recognizing it for what it was, a device for wasting time, a refuge from the disturbing voice of conscience, a scheme to divert attention from moral accountability. For this, she got herself abused roundly by the sons of the world. But of late, she has become tired of the abuse and has given over the struggle. She appears to have decided that if she cannot conquer the great god of entertainment, she may as well join forces with him and make what use she can of his power. So today we have the astonishing spectacle of millions of dollars being poured into the unholy job of providing earthly entertainment for the so called sons of heaven.
Mm. Yeah. I mean the the fact is, yeah, this is like the waters that we swim in here in America, here in sort of Western culture. They're waters of entertainment, like just excessive entertainment. It's just readily available and plentiful, and yeah, it's just like the thing is, it is tough to parse because it is just a yes and no question, but it is heavily weighted. There's so many caveats and warnings. It's like, and again, I come at it and I'm like, I think there's room for us to just sort of, for Christians to be able to enjoy video games, but we have to be very, very careful. And we have to, yeah. And sometimes, and this is something that you said to me, is sometimes I just have to wonder. I do like, I think it is helpful to wonder. It's like, is this even worth it? And I think I think, it's not to completely throw it out or dismiss it. I'm not saying like I'm going to stop playing video games. I'm probably not anytime soon. Um, you know, but I think it's something good to wrestle with. And I think that's the thing, is like, at the end of the day, we need to be wrestling with these things. We need to be um we need to be seeking counsel. We need to be having conversations. We need to be praying about, like, and what I would say is, like, honestly, I think if you're to the point where you're sort of like wrestling with, like, is this an idol? Because like this is some of where I think, like, this question can kind of ask us and get us to wrestle with, like, is that if it is an idol, then we need to just stop. Like you need to just put it down. You need to walk away from it, maybe permanently. Um, and I guess, like I said, the thing is, like, looking at it is, if I got this question and I'm trying to sort of like, it would provoke a lot of other questions in me. It would provoke a lot of other questions, for the other person as well. And yeah, but I'm fading here, dude. So like my sinus pressure is mounting to like just insane levels. I'm like, I don't understand what is going on. And I'm tired, and I've got to get up early tomorrow morning. So I think this is kind of like, maybe this isn't exactly, honestly, Parker, I think that conversation that we had earlier was way better. We probably should have been recording that one.
It was
Um,
feistier. I'll say
it
that.
was a lot feistier. I think the other
We're
thing is, like,
both tired. Yeah.
we're both tired. It was like lunchtime. I think we might have been like a little hangry at the time when we were talking. Like, I
Hmm.
know I was getting hungry. Like, all I could think about was like the sandwich I wanted to eat for a few
Yeah,
minutes.
I'd love to talk some more at some point in a future episode, or just think about things like, again, games. Many games are not morally neutral, and I'll give you an example of like 33 Immortals, which, like, the very concept of the
Mm,
game is that there is an God has handed down a decree that you are to be judged for your sins, and you're part of this group of 33 other friends
yeah,
that are banding together to rebel against the judgment of God and overthrow his judgment
yeah.
as being unjust. And so I think there's a core gameplay mechanic that is basically satanic
Well,
in
it's the
origin.
narrative hook. Like, the narrative thrust is demonic. Yeah, it's
The
satanic.
core thrust of it is demonic and satanic. And I think as the world continues to grow darker, and as these sort of philosophies kind of overpower parts of Western culture, like, we're going to increasingly, as believers, have to wrestle with this, and we're going to see that darkness coming to the fore in ways that I think would have shocked us only a few years ago. So I think it's an evolving conversation that we should be having, and we should be looking closely at this. And it's an area of great personal interest to me, and I've been documenting some of these things, as you've seen. So I'd love
Yeah,
to
yeah,
continue this in some form or fashion down the road at some
yeah.
point.
I mean, we've talked about it before, and like, I think it'll be good to sort of pull that out, and that list, and that sort of like that it's substantial, sort of like, just sort of documentation, and sort of saying like, hey, here's some of like the different ideologies and stuff. um yeah, I do want to, like, I mean, I haven't changed my opinion on that. I do want to sort of uh I do want to circle back around to that one at some point in time. So, but um like, I think this is pretty. So, all that being said, like, there's the TLDR version where Jared said, like, yeah, they can be, and we just need to sort of. I think, sort of answering if someone came up to me and said, and sort of like, basically sort of wanted me to like press me for an answer. I think at this point in time, because I'm exhausted, and said like, hey, are video games a waste of time? I think my response would just be like, they can be. They're not always. They can be. And just like any other, like, is entertainment a waste of time? It can be. It's not always a waste of time. Sometimes it is a good thing that just helps us to sort of enjoy. It is a good gift that we can enjoy from our kind and generous Father. Other times it is absolutely a waste of time. um and it's just like learning to parse that, and just sort of be honest about that, and repent of it when it is evident in our lives. But yeah. So, any closing, like, you got any more sort of like closing thoughts here, or should we just kind of
Now I've
call
got
it?
no saved rounds. I won't keep you up any longer.
No, no, we've spent all the ammunition we're going to, you know, sort of rip off tonight. That being said, let's just kind of move on towards the end here. Just as a bit of a shout out, one, I wanted to shout you out for just being willing. Oh kind of weird. Being willing to hop on the mics here with me tonight. I wanted to shout out John McKelvey for the original question, and then John O'Spark. Obviously, like, give him a bit of a shout out because just like his responses to John's original query were really helpful, really encouraging, and so sort of moving along as far as personal challenges, I really do need to get back into like just counting calories, and I need sleep so desperately, which is kind of silly because I'm staying up late to record this, but I'm not a smart man at times. um, I'm a very silly man at times, but I think, like, here's the thing, folks. We did our best with what we had. We were our the we were doing our best. We were missing Josh, and I'm sure Josh would have had like all sorts of like fun little pokes and jabs, and the episode would have also been like an hour and a half longer, just by proxy of like him having him in the mix. But all that being said, we did, and shout out to Josh, like, for just being too cool for school and hanging out in Austin. Hope you had a good time down there, buddy. For real. There's no sarcasm in there whatsoever. But hey, guys, I'm not going to do a great job of like winding this out. Josh has his little like sort of rip where he just sort of hits it all. And it's like, if you have any thoughts or questions or comments or concerns about this episode and you want to get a hold of us, feel free to. We're on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. We've got the Discord. There's the Facebook group. You can reach out to us via email. And if you're wondering where you can actually get a hold of us, like, all of that is in one place. It's on Linktree Linktree / the backlog breakdown. So get a hold of us there. Like, we're usually pretty active on the Discord, but yeah. That being said, guys, I think Parker and I did the thing that we kind of came here to do tonight. Now, whether or not we did it well, different question altogether. But
Mm-hmm.
thanks for your time. And, guys, until next time, keep beating down your backlogs and we'll keep breaking down the benefits. Good night.